This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Today's guest got a bachelor's from USC in Information Systems and Data Management and has almost completed her executive MBA at USC as well. She's worked mainly in the financial services industry, getting experience for Bank of America, Citigroup, and Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. Please welcome Senior Director, Head of Enterprise Data Management at First American, Yin Warner. Welcome to the show, Yin.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It is absolutely my pleasure to be part of your program. I'm, really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks so much. I am too. Let's get right into it. What is one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
I would actually think it's really applying this customer-centric mindset. Generally, I believe data really is sort of the footprints that we left behind through what we do, how we interact, business-wide, personal relations. And as business world, one of our fundamental things is really thinking about your customers, whether it's internal or external. Many times, really, when we talk about deriving the insights through data, it's really on a journey to understand what has happened in the past, the relationships, interactions, the behavior trend, whether it's internal to a company or the macro level. But to me, if you're really trying to understand what you're trying to achieve through data and business focused, I think it actually ultimately break down more silos and really maximize the value that data can do for us.
How can someone get better at that? Like, let's say somebody hears that advice and they buy in and they say, okay, great. I want to start thinking a bit more about the customer. I'm an dubiously qualified armchair lover of design thinking, which thinks a lot about kind of the customer, the user, the audience. What is your advice for how someone can improve there?
Actually, talking to quite a few folks, many folks think about data innovation more about technology. I think about be curious about the world around us and more of problem solving. And so one of the things I like to just advise people is put yourself as the role of the owner and the CEO of a business. What are you really thinking that your company is servicing and who you're servicing? And are you curious about how do you actually increasing those customers' traction to your company, your product? So when you are really putting yourself in that ownership position, and whether you're a big company, small company, a group within a company, you really are start trying to be curious about those individuals, what they do, what they're trying to achieve, what kind of a question on their mind that they're really trying to understand, who do they service? And then you will ultimately have a better understanding the needs and the problems that they're trying to solve and better utilizing our skills and needs and the data itself to help solving those problems or take advantage of opportunities. So put yourself as the owner. I think it's the step one.
Yeah. One of the things that I have found interesting about working with folks in the financial sector is there is a massive, and I mean massive, like very, very difficult to overstate value on accuracy. I think this makes perfect sense, right? If I logged into my bank account and they were like, oh, whoopsie, like we got it wrong. It's like, oh no, that's a serious problem. And I think that that mentality scales all the way through financial organizations and every portion of it. So it makes sense why things are that way. But I've also experienced because of that need, that hyper need for accuracy, sometimes reporting initiatives take a lot longer to get off of the ground And I wonder if you can talk at all about managing a data environment that has such a premium placed on accuracy and still trying to iterate and develop at a good pace.
Yes, absolutely. I think in the large financial sectors, data management and data governance actually very much in the center of the regulation. So there's several aspects in the financial sectors. Data accuracy is very, very essential. Number one is in the financial, particularly financial accounting, and really understanding um, your deposit situation, for example, because that drives your ability to fund. And not only accuracy, but actually very timely. These are very important. We also, are, I would say it's the conduits of other investors, depositors, right? So we got their assets very, very to our hearts. So, but the other side of this is we also use data of the past to drive a lot of the risk management practice, to understanding what likelihood certain things may happen and the magnitude of those. So in the financial sectors, and not only accurately, reflect your current situation, um, but also be able to predict certain risk levels and changes, and potentially the impact to your company, your depositors, the shareholder, stakeholder is also equally important. So in that area, I think the accuracy has a different meaning. Do we have very comprehensive, the breadth and the depth of the data and sufficient history to allow us to do certain pattern detections and prediction? And are those data actually skewed in any ways? And we're also looking for anomalies besides patterns, right? So I would say, in the financial sectors, data are used um, in many different reasons. In the end, it's protecting our communities, or shareholders or stakeholders and depositors, investors. But it's not necessarily just reporting accurately what's happened, but also using that to better the future.
You kind of perfectly teed me up there. The next area that I wanted to go into is you obviously over the course of your career have had the opportunity to get familiar with risk management and a lot of the tools that we use in data. And you also used a word, predictions. And I do think that it is reasonable for folks that make use of people like you and I to want to try to understand as best as they can what the future holds. However, um, humans are notoriously bad at predicting. And I think that there are some things that we can engage in, right? There are statistical techniques that are valuable. Um, you can gather large enough data sets and you can certainly get some ideas around that. But when we're talking about risk analysis, risk modeling, risk management, and possibly even predictions at large, talk to me a little bit about how we can escape our human nature and somehow get a little bit better at predicting the future.
So I think this is one of those area that started quite maybe a couple decades ago and continuously evolving. When you look at the predictions, I think if you remove the technology data, just looking at the human, our ability of predicting it's hindered by the amount of information we can actually gather, rich in possibly human speed, and then aggregate those information, detect certain bad patterns, and then you interpret that. And then one of the other complication is your level of experience and exposures in the past so that you can understand possible the relationships of the information that you actually gathered, and then to see what that might be signal. Now, if you put that in the world that we live in now, after so many years of digitalizations, information get converted from the traditional analog to digital. Technology brings even more digital data. So now we also now have technology that can quickly access much more broader and sort of relatively related domains of data in a very fast pace. And we now have Gen AI that can actually aggregate and generating information. So then the question is, partially is, do we understand those data in the right context? And can the aggregated information really represent as comprehensive as we can and sort of relationships of those domains, whether it's industries um, or relationship of between the business. So at that point, I still think human needs to coming in right now to take a look at how I interpret this information in the context that it's in. Are there any patterns that seems not reasonable to or experience based on our experience? So at that point, I think it still depends on humans' experiences and ability to interpret and detect potential any gaps in those information or knowledge, and then predict. So I think prediction always has miss. It's not 100%.
Yeah.
Uh, we can better at it. And there's a lot to do with really to me is how much of relevant information we can get to, and are those data actually putting in the right context, and can people interpret those data? How many ways that we can interpret this data? And our ability to really break down these stories, the data telling us to the absolutely granular, digestible component to really understand them. And I think some of those challenges still is today, it's by human is those different skill sets that's required.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the skill set stuff because I think there's a lot to talk about there. One of the things that I want to follow up on is when you talked about kind of embracing the reality of the human element. You alluded to the idea of having a really fundamental understanding of what data you have and what it means. This is obviously now kind of transitioning from risk into, your enterprise data management context. There are a lot of organizations, in my personal opinion, that would benefit from the concepts of enterprise data management, but there are two types of organizations. One, these are typically very large organizations. They have figured out that this needs to be a piece of the puzzle, and they've usually gotten there because there was something that broke or they lost track of something. They say, you know what? This isn't going to happen again. We need to get a good handle on what we have and where it lives and what its life cycle is and all that kind of stuff. Um, and then there are other organizations where it's like, I don't know, that doesn't, where do we make the money from that? So, talk to me a little bit as an expert in data management. How should organizations of all sizes think about enterprise data management? And also, what is the pathway and the way to think about it from a financial standpoint? Lots of these bigger data initiatives uh, sometimes either don't get started or don't get finished because we spend a lot of money and we make a large investment, but there's not immediate or tangible return on investment. So, how should organizations think about it, and how should they think about it financially?
That's a very loaded question. So I'm gonna try to simplify first the mist of data management for a second. So
Please.
y- a lot of folks talk about data management. Some are specifically thinking about the technicalities of acquiring data, storing data, processing data, then doing any kind of analytics and reporting. That is very sort of a small part of data management. Um, there are other folks think about data management and the concept of data warehouse and data marts and BI. So the way I want to simplify this in a non-technical way, talk about data management. If you're thinking the context of any business, just like any other sort of product service investment you make for data, it generates the value for your company within, and because it does inform you the important factors about how you are performing, how you are competing, how your customers happy and satisfied. So there's value the data generates. Anytime we deal with things that comes with value, it also comes with risk. So you want to be aware of in your utilizing data to achieve your business objective, what those risks that come with it. So data management is a constant balance between allowing your organization utilizing data to maximize the value while it's actually safely, ethically done. So data management takes the two sides of the scale, right? You drive for value, yet you need to protect. So in that journey, I think many organizations might start with a lot of the two choices, selection of different solutions, platform, where I would actually, looking back in a lot of the experience, what's successful, I think the first important thing is instill a cultural that really comes top down, cultural in terms of the importance of data. Um, and this actually also important that typically a successful data-informed organization, you actually define a lot of your success through data, measurements of those importance, and you strategizing data as a partner of your business strategy and objective. And when you have that very focused marching forward and you kind of know what is the most important data domains and the outcome that you're driving for year 1, 2, 3, etc. And so this then you kind of bring in how to make that happen in that journey, and you kind of start be able to executing in a more manageable manner and result driven. So rather than just go after so many different pieces of data management, as a big fan, I think get very focused, business focused, and bring down that into iterative approach. It's tend to be more successful.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think when we put the word enterprise into things, sometimes it makes it feel like it's everything all at once, one big project. And my experience with, I was going to say data at scale, but I don't mean the scale of the data, I mean the scale of the organization. So data within, very scaled organizations, I think many times gets viewed a little bit from kind of an old waterfall perspective. Like, we're going to define very specific requirements. We're going to go out, we're going to build this thing, and then it's done. We have done data. And I tend to see the most success be had when we take that approach that you've just talked about, where it's like, okay, let's figure out a business case. Let's figure out where the information is that answers that particular question and just continue going. And I think that most large organizations have been doing this in one form or another in a lot of places for a long time. So it's really just about figuring out where all of those decision making processes live and providing visibility into them, providing a little bit of documentation around them, and helping those individual processes to mature where it makes sense for profit and for whoever the stakeholders are. So I could not agree, and I actually think that um, advice applies to much more than just the enterprise kind of top level of companies in terms of size. This is something that small and mid-sized businesses get the same advice from me on. Right? It's really kind of pick the things that are going to be most beneficial, try to do them the right way, and snowball that into future success. Just keep it in one place.
Absolutely. Yeah. We I think boiling the ocean, it's tend to be a very costly and not so much of a result driven approach. So I think we apply similar approach in the data management world is actually be more value adding and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one last piece of the puzzle that I want to touch on. Let me put it this way. The financial sector is definitely in the group of sectors where there's the largest difference between internal and external reporting. And both of them are fundamental to the organization. So there are critical elements of, pieces of information, whether it's performance or deposits or whatever, that need to be communicated to your depositors and your stakeholders. And then there are also a lot of internal reports that need to happen. And the pipelines, the sources, the types of questions that get asked are so fundamentally different internally and externally in the financial sector. Talk to me a little bit about how an organization can handle those two almost completely separate pipelines, and how does one do one enterprise data management across those two very separate processes?
I'm literally having a flashback of all the journey that we went through large financial institutions. Terminology on how we describe this, every 5 years changes. So I would actually let me address it this way. So when you look at large financial institution, large or small, um, one, you kind of needs to understand what type of services. We're very service oriented, right? Not really tangible product that we're making. What type of services that you actually deliver? How they actually connecting to each other? What's your customer base, market segments, and who are your regulators that regulates those products and the market? When you look at that externally, that's the mandates from regulators. And when regulator looking at the financial sectors, its core is to protect the investors, the depositors' interests, the general. They really want to understand also the interconnectivities, right,
Yeah.
across institutions. And internally, we definitely care about the same, but we also are driving for profitability. So your performance become very important. And the company also, besides the risk and the regulations, we also are looking outward to understand any trends dynamics that changes potentially your industry itself and your customer base that could be B2B or B2C. So when you kind of segmented those things, we kind of know what are the typical domains are the most important data to the company. So now this is where I say over the years we use very different terminologies. There is the fundamental data, which is non-disputable facts, really what has happened as way of doing business. And we have many source systems that handles different transaction-based information that capture those factual data points, the raw data. And then the next really is putting them in the context and rules. So this is where it could varies between how the internal management view versus the regulatory view versus the GAAP, accounting, financial rules.
Mm.
And I would say maybe 15 years, 20 years ago, we used to call the service oriented architecture, where you segregate the service layer from the fundamental data. And now we have a building out the microservices that deliver more scalable, repeatable services, but still build on fundamental raw data. So, and now we have a concept of data as a product with data mesh. It's still very similar. Is can you segregate your data into the right granularities of a domain and actually be able to apply the different sort of rules on top of this to either report to the external financial or managing your internal needs or understanding your customer. So this is where I think a little unique to the data folks is we have to be very business savvy, really understanding the landscape of the business. And so when you do that, you can actually pretty quickly dissect the whole ocean of data into what the most important domains of data to you, your business. Even though you're not going the waterfall approach, building architecture, you can actually properly bifurcate those domains to really be iteratively achieving the bigger and scale up. So the scenario you talk about to me is horizontal scaling, using the same data but overlay different rules and contextual information and quickly satisfy the different needs. Um, that's my view. Simplified version.
I think we may have just started touching on it right there, but I'm curious to know, aside from that, what is hardest for you right now? What are some of the things that are most challenging, and what are you doing to combat the challenges?
I actually feel like technology is important, but the technology and skills around that is not the most challenging. The most challenging, I think, it's this data literacy and people and skill. So what I mean by that is really if you think about you being the sole person that try to achieve something, your whole body is well coordinated, your brain sending the signals that tells you what to do. There's no rift between what you want to do and how you're going to get there and execute on that. With organization that we have very different roles in this, you know, getting the data, prepare the data, utilizing the data. Some are highly technical skilled folks, some are highly business oriented, non technical individuals. And part of the challenge, I think, here is when there's a difference in experience and skill set, it takes a bit of a translation. So in that journey, again, back to my beginning, if you really be curious about what your partners, stakeholders, and customers do, try to really understand from their aspect, that's a bit of outreach by every single type of role play. And, you kind of need to shadow the knowledge into a different domain area, close some gap. And on the other side of that is learning journey. And that's not just technology, but that's about your organization, about the business, about the interconnected industries and sectors. So learning really shouldn't be a reactive because there's new technologies coming in. It should be more proactive and be curious and leading. So there's one last part is what I call it core competencies, communication. I think data folks, it's not just a technology and business. It's actually very important. We are interpreters. We are communicating constantly through what we see in the data to different personas. um, Communication skill is actually really, really important. Whether you're trying to sell a great idea to solve certain things or finding stories in those data for opportunities, if you can effectively communicate that, whether to secure fundings or get buy-ins, that could be really challenging in using data driving for positive outcome. So yeah, to me, that probably is the biggest, is constantly coaching, mentoring, and try to grow the organization and close some of this knowledge rips and skill differences.
Over the course of doing this podcast, I've had my ideas change and refine quite a bit. Um, I've been working in this space with lots of organizations for over a decade now. Um, but really over the last year, I think one of the things that has become so clear to me is exactly what you talked about is how critical and challenging the human elements of things are, whether that's designing reports in a way that people will digest or understand how to use, or that combat um, normal psychological biases and issues that people have with digesting information, getting, primed in certain directions. There's all sorts of, interesting sociology and psychology that goes into understanding how somebody's going to consume a report most effectively, and how we as data people can engineer that interaction to get better business outcomes. But There's another thing that you touched on that's an idea that I've been noodling on lately, which is this idea around the types of people that are on any given team. So for better or for worse, I view organizations, companies, whatever, as groups of people with some sort of kind of shared goal, and they all have roles within that organization to try and help achieve those goals. And depending on the type of the organization, and even within a given sector or industry, different organizations will take different approaches of staffing and try and have a different blend, different types of people, different perspectives, different skill sets. And I personally am of the belief that this is something that absolutely has to get leaned into. Um, if we have an organization of people that are exceptionally technical, all of them know how to write code, very, very computer savvy, data savvy people, the way that I'm going to provide information and data to that team is going to be very different from a team of people whose primary expertise and skill sets and job responsibilities are non-technical in nature. And I think one of the big mistakes, lies, I don't know what exactly the right word is, but has been this kind of pipe dream of data and analytics as just being capable of being digested at every single level by every single person. And I think that it's really about crafting solutions that inform your team where they are. Certainly, there's talent development, exactly as you mentioned. This is critical, but a certain measure of kind of meeting those people exactly where they are, providing, heavy duty database, all that kind of stuff to the people that can handle it, and the opposite to folks who can't. So providing them really digestible reporting. What recommendations do you have for an organization that is at that place and says, hey, we know that we have a diverse group of different types of consumers. How can we feed all of them?
That is a fantastic question. That actually it's been in the I would say just about the last year or so. I don't have a perfect solution, but it's been something I've been navigating and exploring. And just like you said, it really depends on the nature of the company. For a very software focused company or platform driven business model, like Uber, for example, they have majority of the folks that technical, mathematic, and they can really, build models and understanding insights of their customers, the drivers, etc., the behaviors. Where you have other companies that are traditionally like financial sectors that are very service oriented, relationship building, and the company size get very large and hierarchical. You do have folks that are focusing on non-technical aspect or the skill level is quite different. So I think part of the things we talk about this called the democracy, and it's challenging to truly get to democracy because you will face sometime individuals who can interpret nice diagrams, the trends, but simply have no idea how to further develop from there. And part of this is, I think it gives opportunity to, like chatbot, for example, natural process language kind of solutions is we could build certain things. Those business individuals are very comfortable asking natural English questions, and that can lead them to specific results and data versus you have folks like myself. I would prefer that you give me very fundamental data. And because the moment I start seeing some of the answers, I ask more questions and they start peeling more and more further. And I think because those different skill sets and company structure and cultural, how you actually putting the data analytic resources, how that organization look like really varies as well. There are times you would have more decentralized the analytic capabilities so that can properly partner with the non-technical folks to achieve more, be more efficient. Um, and then there are companies that are very much still rely on the centralized capabilities where this can, for a large organization, this could become very time consuming because you're going through that sort of requirement gatherings and developing what dashboards, reports. So I think it really is a balance. And back to that skill differences, right? How willing each person to reach out and step out of their comfort zone to be curious and explore. At the same time, we're looking for different technologies that can help and fulfill the different skill levels needs. So we'll see where it gets to. I don't think we have that perfect democracy today, just because the differences in skills, experiences, and ability to really interpret the data that we present.
So outside of the world of finance and data and EPM and all that stuff, outside of work, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a type of person that's really curious. And I also spot problems. I don't naggy about them because I spot problem because I see them as opportunities. I like to solve them. I also like simplify things. So, and what other things that I'm very, very, very passionate about is not stay within just the financial sectors, right? There's this kind of a viewpoint. If you start in certain industry, you kind of pretty much stuck in the industry for your whole career. And one of the reasons I really wanted to go back to the executive MBA is networking. And really understanding beyond just financial. And this goes back to why I'm really liking data, because data actually tells you a lot of the connectivities beyond just one industry. It connects quite breadth, and then it tells me where the challenges, opportunities, problems are. So outside the work time, I call it, I do a lot of research actually. I actually recently researched quite a bit on the healthcare industry, especially US. We have a lot of the challenges. I personally love fashion. And so in the fashion industry, especially fast fashion, it's kind of the strikes a balance between what it does to the fashion company versus to or environmental, where that balance should be. So I do a lot of this curiosity driven type of research. Um, and then I have family. I have 3 children. My husband is a scientist. They study outer space. So we don't talk about work at the non-working hours with our kids. So we like to travel. We like to visit. My kids are in the UC system. So I kind of like spend time chat about what they learn. I think the newer generation really brings much more different mindset, way of thinking. So learning from them is actually fun. I'm very busy right now because I'm
I would say so. And you definitely sound like every data person that I've met with the curiosity. I don't think that folks last long in the data space without just having that. Well, why did that happen? I wonder how that works. Right. Well, let's dig in and find out. I think that's what causes us. It's that curiosity that drives the skill development that then becomes the career. So that sounds spot on. If anybody likes what you've had to say, wants to reach out, connect with you, talk about anything, learn a little bit more, what are the best places to reach out and connect with
LinkedIn. I'm actually very active in LinkedIn. I received connections from very much like myself, curious folks from different
you? Yeah.
industries, and they do the same. So, yeah, absolutely. They can reach me through LinkedIn, and we set up further discussions.
Awesome. Yin, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to have this conversation. It was so clear that, particularly in the world of knowing what you know, that which I would say is a better way of describing EPM. You have the experience, and getting to talk a little bit about risk was super cool as well. Being my background is in mathematics, so I love uh, getting close to the topics of some of the more advanced models and some of the statistical stuff and the ways that people think about that. It was just such a joy to get to have this conversation with you today. So thank you again so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for having me. It was very much of a fun conversation. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I also want to make sure to thank our listeners, especially if you've made it this far. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure that if you like this, you tell a friend about the podcast, give us a like, give us a review, give us a rating, hopefully a 5-star rating. That stuff really helps to keep the engine moving. It's a huge help. Yin, thank you again so much for coming on. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbеттerdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.